Greetings, my Guzzlers. Almost Christmas, and I'm going to cook something that is sort of traditional, perhaps more for Germany or somewhere like that. And I found this a while ago, and I've been waiting to get towards Christmas so you can bake it. Good thing about this, you can actually bake it well in advance and freeze it, but we're not doing that. Christmas is almost here, so we're going to make Stollen. This is Stollen, but the recipe comes from Richard Bertinet, the French chef or French baker, and I've done some of his stuff, and I've still got loads more of his I want to do, but this one is one where he puts his own slight spin on a Stollen, mainly because he puts rum in it. You can actually put other alcohol in it, you don't have to put any alcohol in it, but anyway. And also he puts frangipane. I don't think the alcohol is so much of a novelty, it's the frangipane. But anyway, before we get anywhere near that, we need to make our dough, and we need to add our fruit filling and our rum. So, let's get baking. And what I've got here is 250 mils of whole milk, and that's going in there. So this is obviously like an enriched bread dough. You're going to want 2 large eggs to go in this, 500 grams of strong white bread flour, 25 grams of cast sugar, 10 grams of fine sea salt, 10 grams of fresh yeast. We're using instant active, I think it is. I can never remember which one it is. It's not the normal one I've used. This one doesn't need activating. Okay, 100 grams of unsalted butter, and that's the initial dough. We'll get that going, and then we'll talk about the ingredients for the whatever. So now we're going to add in 2 whole eggs. Okay, and that goes. 2 whole eggs. Right, the flour. Whoops. In goes that flour. I'm going to use that bowl later, so I'll put that there. Whoops, managed to get some of it down there. Useless bugger. I will need to flour my surface later. Sugar. Well, actually, what I'm going to do at this stage, because I'm using dried yeast, he uses fresh yeast, and he mixes it in. I'm going to put my salt in there. Okay. Just going to give that a little bit of a mix in. Now I'm going to put my sugar in. Give that a little mix in. Oh, I just realised there's milk in the bottom of that. Silly bugger. And then what he does with his fresh yeast, he basically dips it all in there, and then crumbles it all in together. But we're just going to put that yeast in like that. Right, now the butter. Okay, in goes that butter. Where's my dough hook? There's my dough hook. Now we start this very slow. What we want to do is basically bring it together. So we start with a very slow speed. Okay, for a few minutes, about 4, he said, and then we'll increase it up slightly to a medium, and we would keep going until this dough mixture comes away from the side. Okay, 90 grams of sultanas, and then we've got some whole glacé cherry, well, semi-whole, so these have been chopped in half, 50 grams of glacé cherries, and then I just need my spoon again. Mixed pill, 100 grams, in that goes. Actually, I'm going to leave that spoon there. £30 grams of toasted, lightly toasted flaked almonds. half a teaspoon of cinnamon, ground obviously, and then rum. Now he says 2 large tablespoons. If you watch him do it, he does it all by eye. So 1, 2. Now he claims, and then we're going to need that, there's more rum coming at the end, okay, when everything's baked. So I'm just going to sort of gently mix that together. So we're not making a fruit cake, all right? So just splitting them cherries up. So it's not heavy on the fruit and nuts in there, okay? And now we're just going to set that to one side. And now that's started to pretty much combine. There's some lumps of butter there, but that don't matter because now we're just going to turn that up to medium. And we're just going to carry on going until, like I say, it comes away from the side of the bowl, but equally that we've got rid of some of them lumps. I've had a little bit of a scrape because it's sticking on the bottom a little bit, but everything's all come together. So this is where we now tip that fruit mixture into there, get it all in there, including that rum. Like I say, this is the only rum that's going into the Stollen, but at the end we're gonna basically going to be coating them in a rum flavoured butter and sugar. So now at this point, what he says we want to do is gently mix all this together. Okay, he said don't whack it up and smash all the fruit together. We want to keep it, I'm not quite sure how it's going to smash it all together, but anyway. So just gently now, he says for about a minute on a very low speed, just to get it to start bringing all that fruit and nuts into that mixture, and we will finish it by hand. Right, you can see here, I've lifted it out. When you look in it, it is a very sticky dough still. Let me show you. Okay, so what we're now going to do is I'm just going to get rid of that mixer because I need the room here. We're going to tip this out and we're just going to finish it by hand, as it were, before we get it ready to prove. So we're just going to do a light dusting. I don't know quite how he does it. He seems to like, he's got a bowl of flour there and he does this really fine sort of sprinkle. Okay, and now we just want to loosen that dough out and tip that out onto that floured surface. Now he talks about you having a top and a bottom, but obviously the way that's all mixed up you can't see any of that. So we just want to make sure we get everything out of there. Now, get that out of the way. So now, essentially, he talked about it being a top. There isn't really a top there. So, and this is a bit more sticky than his. Different flours absorb different amounts of liquid. So you might find that it's not quite the same consistency, if you like, but essentially we're just wanting just to make sure that's all in there, and then we want a bowl, and what he's going to do is, whoops, that's a bit on the heavy side. We now want to lift that up as best we can. Put that into that bowl. And this is where we're just going to leave it covered over for about an hour, hour and a half. We basically want it to start getting almost double in size, but we want to see visible bubbles. Okay, so I'm going to put that in my Brod & Taylor bread proofer to make sure it's warm enough. So we'll have a clear down, and then at some point during that proving, we're going to make the frangipane. Right, we've had a little bit of a clear up, made a coffee. The bread's, the dough's proving. So at this point, we're going to make the frangipane. Now, actually, I said to you, there's no more rum going in that until the end. Actually, there's rum going in here as well. So, we've got 125 grams of unsalted butter. And what we want to do is just, we want it softened, because we just want to start creaming this together. So that's the butter sort of creamed, if you like. So now we're going to add caster sugar, 125 grams of that. I'm just going to start mixing that in, and then the ground almonds, we've got 125 grams of that. Just going to add in about half of that at this stage. So we now just want to start bringing all that together, and then in a minute I'll just mix in the remainder of them ground almonds. Now I've got 50 grams of plain flour there, and I've got 2 eggs plus eggshell. I can see in there, that'll have to come out. 2 eggs, and you're going to want 2 large tablespoons of rum again. Now we do a similar thing with the flour. We add in about half, mix that in, and then remainder of that flour, mix all that in. I now want to add, I'm going to start with 1 egg. Okay, and I'm also, should have kept some of that shell back to get rid of that. I'll get that in a minute. So I'm just going to beat that in. It may be, I'll see how wet this is. It may be, these are very large eggs. Well, they call them very large, they don't look that large. I've got a feeling this is wet enough, so I may not use that other egg. We want this, I mean, remember we're adding some more liquid with the rum. Okay. We do want this like a cream. As he says, you basically want it so that when you spoon it up like that, it sort of, I know that's a big lump that was hanging off, but it stays stuck to your spoon. So for now, I'm going to leave that egg, and we're going to add the rum. So 2 generous tablespoons of rum, 1, 2, and then, oh, I could put some in my coffee, couldn't I? Better not, well, early morning-ish. So I'm just going to mix that in, and then depending on how wet that is, I might not add the remaining egg, because I've got a feeling it's not going to really need that. So I decided, given how it is, I'm not adding that extra egg. Okay, but obviously we need to taste it. Definite kick of that rum. Got the rum, got the almonds. So now we're just going to set that to a side, because we don't need to do any more now until that dough is proved. He tells an interesting story about that, about when he was a young lad working his first bakery. He used to love that, and on Mondays he used to sneak into the sort of fridge where they had that, because his boss didn't work on a Monday. And he said his boss was this big guy, quite a big, you know, strict guy, and he used to sit in there licking it. He said, and one Monday he sat in there on the floor with a bowl, and great big bowls of it they made, and he's sticking his finger in eating it. His boss comes in, give him a good hiding, mainly because he was sticking his hands in it. But anyway, we're now just a waiting game for that dough. It's had almost half hourish, so we'll catch up later. So here we are, about an hour and a half later, and we've got a considerable rise. I'm going to have to jump that other yeast. I've got the one that needs activating. I've long suspected it probably is past its prime, don't work. First time I've used that yeast. So anyway, I've prepared 2 baking trays. This is going to make 6 Stollen. Now he said you could make one great big one, which would be massive, or you could make 2 medium ones, or he makes 6, and they're a bit more manageable. Plus you can give them as gifts, which I might do if I'm feeling generous. So the baking trays I've got, I'm going to bake 3 on each. So I've got 2 lined with baking parchment. Got my frangipane made. But the other thing he puts in it is marzipan. So I've weighed out 200 grams of marzipan, and I've split it up into 12. Okay. And what he says you want to do is roll them out. Just trying to think how much he wants them rolled out by. Just wondering if that might be a bit long. There's going to be 2 of these per. I think I want to make that a bit long. 2 per Stollen. So I'm just going to get these rolled out. So I've lightly, oh, and actually you can see how bubbly it is there. I haven't got the kind of bubbles he was getting on top, a bit like when you make a focaccia. But you can certainly see how well that yeast has been working. Now, we just want to loosen this from the bowl, and the top side is sort of like the non-sticky side. We're going to tip it out so that remains on the bottom. Okay. And this is where, oh, that really has worked its magic, that yeast. Now, what we want to do is sort of ease it out into like a rectangle shape, and then we want to lift up that side and fold it over. Okay, so we've now got that non-sticky side on that side, and now we're just going to stretch that up and over that way. Okay, now we're just going to tuck that under, although that is leaking out a bit there. Now at this point we want to try and divide it up into 6. So just going to get a bit more flour down there, and then going to roll it down so we've got the seam side underneath. Now he's saying that they should be, you can do it by eye, but you want to make sure they're even. He's saying they should be about 220, but because of the way I've rolled that, I'm suspecting doing it by eye ain't going to work. So actually I had to make just slightly under 220, but they're now all evenly sized. So we take one piece, and what we want to do is just flatten it out into a rectangle. Bearing in mind we want it to be just big enough that we can get that marzipan into it. Now this is where we now take, should have got this out earlier, might have helped, about a tablespoon-ish of this frangipane. Now we don't want too much because we don't want it leaking out. So we're just spreading it, not quite to the edges, okay. And now we take one of our marzipan rolls and we press that down in there, and we take a second one and we press it down in there. So we've got one on that side, one on that side. Now this is where we now take that edge and fold that over into the middle, so we've encased that into it. And now you can turn it round if it makes life easier. Just want to stretch this out a bit, and we're now folding that over, so we've now encased that marzipan in there. And then we just want to tuck those corners in, tuck it under, and there is our first Stollen. So just going to lay that on that baking tray. So remember, you want to allow enough room in there. We don't want it too crowded, okay. But the big sheets I've got, I'm doing 3, so I'm just going to carry on doing that. I'll do another one for you just so you see what we're doing. Again, sprinkle that over, take your dough, spread it out into a rough triangle, okay, and then want about a tablespoon of frangipane. This helps keep it moist. Don't say that word, pervert. Okay, perhaps gone a little bit overboard with that one. So then we put a strip of marzipan there, a strip of marzipan there. You just stretch out that little bit, pull it over the top, turn it round, stretch this bit out a bit, fold it over, seal that down, and then remember we just want to seal in them ends. So I'm sort of like folding corners and then just tucking that over, and there we go, there's number 2. So that's them done, and what I'm just going to do is just give them a light sprinkle of flour, because what we're now going to do is cover them over, and we're going to let these prove. Go that way a minute. Oh yes it will, look at that. One cloth. Excuse me. And so now we're going to let these sit. Can't put these in my proving cabinet because they're too big. So we're going to sit and let them again prove for at least an hour, hour and a half, and we'll see how we get on. Now nearer the end of that time, we'll put our oven on and we'll be baking these at 180. Okay, and we're also going to need to pair an egg wash. Now we're still going to need some butter and we're still going to need some rum, but that's once it's all cooked and cooled. Apologies it looks like this is done. It's partly because I've just realised as my camera went into standby mode that I'd actually forgot to turn the video recording on. So what I've got in here, or I had in here, or still got some of in there, was an egg wash. 1 egg and a pinch of salt, well beaten together. And his trick by using a pinch of salt makes a far better egg wash than I've ever used before. give everyone a light coat. You can see they've risen well. They are quite bubbly inside. When I was pressing down in some of the bits with the brush, it was actually almost like collapsing the bubble inside. So the oven's preheated. Let me just, got a bit of egg wash on me. The oven's preheated to 180, and as he's saying, just be aware, even though you're going to cook them for about 18 to 20 minutes, you may get hot spots in your oven. So you may want to rotate the trays, swap the trays around, whatever. But we want a nice golden brown on them, including on the bottom. And when we're sure they're ready, bring them out and just leave them on the trays, on the paper, on top of the oven to let them cool completely. So let's get these in the oven. So here's our finished, well, not finished, but finished baking Stollen. Okay, nice and brown all over. Had a little bit of leakage on one of them, but very little. Now, what we're going to do now is take about 250 grams of butter. Now that's just shy of 250, but that's going to be plenty, given what we're going to do with it. And what we want to do is melt this down, because we're going to bathe our Stollen in rum butter, and then we're going to dip them in some icing sugar. Okay, so at the moment we've got them on the trays where they started. So it's simply a matter of melting this just as it starts to bubble. Then we're going to take it off the heat, and we're going to add a small glass, he just defines it as a small glass of rum, into that butter, and we'll just whisk it in, and that will be our rum butter dip. Excuse me. So it's just a matter at the moment of waiting for that. Now I've cut some squares, or sort of rectangles, of wax paper. We're going to wrap them all individually in wax paper, and then wrap them in a layer of parchment paper. Now if you were given these as presents, he then wraps them in some sort of like white paper. I haven't got anything like that, so we're going to give it an extra layer of greaseproof. And then I've got some sort of Christmassy type twine to tie it all up, but we'll worry about that once we get there. So at the minute I'm just waiting on that melting down. Right, that's just starting to come up to bubble, so at which point just turning the heat off, and I've probably got a rather large glass of white rum there. So now we're just going to whisk that in. I'll get that out of the way. I'll move my icing sugar up there. So I'm going to put some gloves on for this. Whoops, splash that everywhere. Because what we're going to do is we're going to dip it in there, and then back on the tray. But I'll get my gloves on first. Pick up our Stollen, and part of the reason is not just because it's buttery, but it's equally because it's going to be hot, although that rum should have cooled it. So now what we're going to do is just going to toss it into this icing sugar. I might have to get some more icing sugar. I didn't want to go overboard, simply because obviously although like he says you can reuse it as such, depends whether you want buttery, rum buttery icing sugar, doesn't it, on anything. So I'm just giving it a good coating. Whoops, splashing it as I know I would. Drain it into the icing sugar. So we're just going to repeat that for all of these. I'm going to have to get some more icing sugar. Good job I bought plenty in. And then once these are all coated, we'll wrap them, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. So that's them all coated. So we start with our piece of wax paper, and we take our Stollen, place it onto it. Actually, I might do that one that way round, I think. No, it will be best that way. And we're going to pick these sides up. Now, unfortunately, it's not quite big enough, but never mind. Otherwise, I'll do some folds. But what we're going to do is just fold the corners in, and then that's going to get tucked underneath. Remember, we are like triple wrapping this. Okay, so that's that one done. And then the idea being, we take a piece of the greaseproof, place that onto there, and we're going to do the same again. We're just going to wrap that over, fold them corners in, tuck it underneath, and then we're just going to take one more piece and we're just wrapping again. Whoops, slippery little fucker. Under that goes. You might want to make your paper a little bit bigger so you can fold it down, but then we take our twine and we just want to tie it off. So underneath, whoops, let's just come undone, up over the top, and then we're just going to tie it together. I'm going to put a knot in it, and then we'll finish it. Actually, I'm just going to knock that under there, hold that in there, and that can go under there, and then we're just going to finish it off with a little festive bow. Just going to double tie that bow, trim those ends a little bit, don't want great big ends like that, and there we have our little packaged Stollen. Here's all of my wrapped Stollen. Some of them are going as presents. That bit there needs just tucking under. Some of these are going as presents, but of course we can't not have one to try. So this one's slightly deformed in the middle there, so let's just cut off the end and then cut a slice through, and let's have a look. So you can see the marzipan in there just about. It's sticky because of the rum butter and the icing sugar. Let's taste it. Right, it's fucking gorgeous. I've only promised one as a present so far. The other three don't know they're getting them. They might not be. It's almost as good as Christmas cake. But you've got the fruit, haven't really got much in the way of nuttiness. You're getting the sugar, you're getting the rum. Perfect. Wrapped like that, they keep 2 to 3 weeks. In fact, they mature. If you want to keep them longer, before you do the outer wrapping, do the the wax and the baking paper. You can then freeze it, and then you can bring it out. Let it thaw, give it a nice wrapping over the top, and there you go. God, I'm having another bit of that. I don't think that's going to last the night. That is Richard Bertinet's take on Stollen. And it's a fucking good take. Oh, don't you? Oh, I might have to eat that. It's going to fall over. Well worth the effort. Well worth the effort.